you get linked up with Elective Affinities?
David and I have known each other for a long time. He was in our writer-director lab at the theatre, and I just got to know his work, and we'd always talked about working together on something. And yeah, I guess it was over a year ago now that he came to me, and said that Rising Phoenix Rep and Piece by Piece were working on the show, and would I like to get involved? And so yeah, that was how it first got started.
Wonderful. Yeah. It's curious. I first got to know this play when I worked at the Royal Shakespeare Company when we did the world premiere in 2005, and we did it in a tiny studio with a wingback chair and a little coffee table. So this feels to me like the maximalist conclusion of Elective Affinities. So I'm curious from you, Sarah. Mm-hmm. When did you decide that was going to be your way forward with this production?
To do it site-specifically?
Yeah, and how did you come to that?
Well, it was something David had been excited about, and I had a history of doing site-specific work in London. That was what I did primarily there with the company I had in London. And so once we started really talking about it, it just felt like that was the natural thing to do with the show. We were excited about sort of creating it in the most intimate way we could, and doing it in this way felt like how to do that. So.
And how did you start that process?
We started looking on the Upper East Side, and it was actually really difficult to find somewhere in the neighborhood. There were a lot of real estate issues we ran into, and with various buildings. So, we started to question, could we find something similar in Gramercy or in other parts of town? So we sort of widened the search and started looking elsewhere. But the more we visited other neighborhoods, we just felt like it had to be the Upper East Side, that there was something so specific about who Alice was as a person. And, the feel of the neighborhood, the architecture, everything just started to feel, but particularly culturally and just given who Alice is, other neighborhoods just started to feel wrong. And so we really zeroed back in on the Upper East Side and decided it had to be here. And we work with a location scout who does film as well, because it's not something we typically do in the theatre, finding a locale like this. And so he started showing us spaces, and we started looking, and and this was the space we found that we were super excited about. And without giving the game away, it's an institutional building. So Louisa can talk in a minute about the challenges of creating a domestic space in a building that has an institutional use currently. So. And
before we get to that, Sarah has said that you did a lot of site-specific work in the UK. I'm curious, Louisa, have you ever approached this particular challenge before in your career?
It's so funny because I actually kind of always feel like I'm working site-specifically.
Yeah, totally.
And I feel like even when I'm presented a theater that's a traditional theater that has seating that you can't move, I still kind of see it as a site in the sense of that every theater has its weird little ticks, and it's some are more architecturally present than others. So I feel like you're always kind of dealing with that idea. That said, this idea of moving the audience in a way that they're maybe not as accustomed to, or there isn't, traditions that are helping kind of move an event. I think that maybe goes back to more my art school days. I haven't had the opportunity to do as many actual professional productions in that manner, but I don't know, I'm always feeling that way, and I think actually Soho Rep was always felt a little site-specific, so maybe working there.
It's such a weird building that, yeah.
Yeah, and it is in the theater. It's a space that became a theater. And
yeah.
I think in New York we experienced that a lot, so it's probably part of it.
I'm interested that you think it's less of it's porous, the difference between theater and site-specific, that they're more similar than one might think.
Well, I think I've been lucky to work on a lot of productions that have been considered events. That there's a sense of not just the set fulfilling a visual role, but somehow shaping the whole experience. So I think that's the kind of work I'm attracted to, and the kind of work that has come my way. And certainly, you know, I teach at Hunter College, and we have a black box, so a lot of our productions are about, you know, changing the audience and moving the audience and thinking of new ways to use our space. So I think it does come up for me.
Well, focusing on this set in particular, walk us through what is real and what is not in this house of mirrors.
I feel like I wish we had some of the photos right now.
Tell us what did this room look like when you walked in originally on your first site visit?
Yeah.
Well, it definitely this space feels much more institutional, I think, even though there's, I mean, the details, as we've been told, are original. So it was a domestic setting. So even though it's now you know, it's occupied by an institution, it's still in essence has much of its domestic life. So a lot of the pieces that they use here to have their own events just feel a little bit more kind of sturdy and stark and not, you know, not personal. So I think really the art journey was, in my mind, less about the space and the challenges of the space and more about the challenges of Alice and like what we had to learn about her to get to the kind of
all the
details that we wanted to experience and to be truthful about that somehow and not So that said, there's little things that probably people didn't see where there's signage and certainly there was probably a lot more Irish art in this room. And you know there were things that would have been kind of really strong indicators of the institution. But I think the bones of this building were what got us excited. And then, you know, just the fact that we're across the street from the Met is just so
I love that moment when she just flicks her finger towards that museum over there.
Yeah, that was, you know. So, and also I think we got into the kind of, I don't know, I think it was intriguing too that there's aspects of this building that are larger than I think we imagined as where Alice would live. I mean, the second floor is much more grand, and I think we started to kind of realize that there was a little bit of a narrative there that perhaps she and John no longer really use that floor, that this is kind of an oddity, that they've even kind of put the sculpture down there. And so some of the things that maybe were institutional about this space and weird when we first came in, like, oh my gosh, this, you know, the proportions of this don't feel like a living room, forced us to make choices about using this space, this particular room, and to kind of have more of a journey through the space. So.
Yeah.
Speaking of this room,
yeah, no, and I was just going back to the whole sort of site-specific thing, because and sort of how we've responded to stuff. I feel like it really affected even David and the writer's process as well. Like, I've never worked in this way with a writer, and I think it was because we were responding to the room and the building and the site and everything, that we were sort of doing the same thing with the actress Zoe and together. So we would write text in response to how audiences were interacting and the book, and just all of that we started to kind of build out. And so I feel like it really affected, I don't know, just hearing you talk about how responsive you have to be when it's not a traditional theatre. I feel like that just kind of brought out that aspect of process across the board, which was exciting. Anyway, that was a tangent.
Yeah, we could share that we did have one kind of fun. I mean, we went through various variations of how to use the building. They've been very generous to let us come and
take over the whole
here.
building. Yeah.
And there's a back room that's very yellow and chintzy and really kind of has a fabulous quality to it. And
that's Zoe's dressing room.
But
for
a
a while,
about 3 days, we were convinced that 30 people could sit in a room that's about half the size. And then we finally had 20 people come and try to sit 20 people in there, and then we realized that maybe claustrophobia wasn't the only experience to have with the play, so we moved on from that. But I mean,
yeah.
I think what shocked me in many ways was kind of having to go through this kind of physical experience of the space. Whereas I think often in the theater, we build a model and we spend a lot of time remotely. Like, we're not actually in the space. We're kind of looking at a shrunken version of what we're going to see, because it has one point of view and sometimes. this, because we knew that this had so many points of view, we had to be here a lot.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I don't know. I just went off on a tangent.
No, not at all. I love the feeling of being in this room. It's incredibly intimate, and a wonderful sort of atmosphere. And what I particularly love about it is the sort of mix of styles. So you have like a 60s coffee table and sort of something from the 20s and this lamp. I'm curious, can you talk a bit about how you populated the room and the objects in here? And is it fair to say that none of this was here when you found this room?
That couch was there, but it was red.
Yeah. We slip covered the couch. And the books, some of these are
some of the books. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much everything else.
Everything else.
It was brought in.
Yeah.
And it's Craigslist.
That was there, but it was full of.
Oh yeah, the case.
The case was there, but not the wonderful.
But not the piece in the case.
Not the creation inside it, but the case was
Yeah,
full of like Irish artifacts and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, and the society had been so great at just letting us really explore the whole building and take it over. And, yeah.
It's wonderful how the layers of Alice's life sort of accumulate in this room. And I'm curious, can you speak a bit about the research you did for that and what?
Yeah, we looked at a lot. We looked at a lot of research, and I think, and again, it's all about kind of trying to understand who Alice is and how maybe she had changing ideas over her time living here of what would be correct, or I don't even want to say fashionable because I think that might not be the right word, but this idea of taste and also that this idea that with privilege comes the ability to have whims, and yet there's also this history that you sense that she's got behind her. So I think some pieces are really meant to kind of be like, well, that's been around for a while, and she's had to kind of, she almost doesn't see it anymore. Mm-hmm. Whereas other things maybe are newer, or she's kind of interested in. So we gave ourselves that like pretty large palette, I would say. And yet at the same time, I think we began to discover when it got too wacky, it started saying something about her. Or if it got too conservative, it started saying something about her. If it got too designed, we didn't want it to feel like she might have friends who, have designers and she's picked up some things, or she's had somebody come and give her a couple of suggestions, but I never felt like she was somebody who had her whole place done.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And and that was especially hard for me because I think once you start, start kind of creating an interior, it's pretty hard not to want to control every aspect of it. So, there's things here that I still kind of cringe at, but then I'm kind of like, but that's good because they're odd and they're not, they don't necessarily, there's a story there. And so, and then I for whatever reason, I don't actually know why, but the kind of the 70s lamps, I just felt like at some point Alice really believed she was modern, and I felt like it's not modern now, that it was that modern. Yeah. And it oddly now has come back to be feeling a little kind of retro modern or something, but so yeah, but it's been a fine line.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, I think I'm still walking and seeing in store windows of like, oh, that Alice would buy that, or because you kind of have to really try to be understanding her, and she's not that easy to understand in the end.
Yeah, she's very
There's places there that you don't necessarily get to go, and I think that we had to have a little bit of a light touch in that way too.
Yeah.
So.
Well, before I open it up to questions, and I hope we have a couple of questions, I don't want to let you off the hook without talking about the sculpture downstairs briefly. We spoke about this last week in this discussion series with the man who made that sculpture, who was in conversation with a curator from the New Museum. I'm just wondering, in a nutshell, how did you come to dusting?
You want to start that?
Well,
I think that was really one of the harder.
It was really hard. It was the thing I think that we probably spoke the most about in terms of initially figuring out the design and just figuring out how the performance was going to occur and where the sculpture was going to be in reference to Alice. I felt like it was important that it wasn't in the same room as her, and that the audience didn't understand what they were seeing before they saw the show, and so that they were not able to look at the sculpture as she was talking about talking about it, and as the show progresses, because I feel like it becomes this kind of allegory for the sculpture is this sort of embodiment of it in a way. So originally we talked about it maybe being visible from where she was, but just the architecture of this space, it ended up making sense for it to be downstairs. So I guess like it wanted to feel like this was kind of a new direction for Alice. Like they've been interested in art. There's art around. There's art books everywhere. But she's kind of more interested in museums than she is in art. So but this feels like a new sort of point in her life where she's suddenly, I think there's a little bit of a desperation setting in, and so this kind of epic idea has come into their lives, or into Alice's life, to commission this huge piece. It wanted to feel kind of gross and incredibly elegant at the same time, and sort of primeval and oozy, but sort of I'm trying to think of all the descriptors that we use, but it wanted to feel like something oozing out of the earth that was kind of visceral, but also something that you could kind of hold at arm's length. And it kind of wanted to be almost bad, but not quite bad, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, those were some of the sort of factors that that went into it.
By your own descriptions, I think you knocked it out of the park. Absolutely. Are there any questions for Sarah or Louisa? Yes, sir.
I actually wanted to ask about the sculpture. I'm glad you talked about it a little. It's amorphous and ominous, and it is organic looking. It looks like an oil spill or lava or something. Was this somehow conceptualized in the play, the piece that's downstairs, or was it described? Was it?
All we know from the text is what
you
hear
heard,
Alice say.
Oh, okay. Literally, that's it. There's no.
And I think we even discovered things about the way she describes it, that are actually kind of horrific, And you suddenly realize that she's like, oh, I think it's African. It's actually could be kind of a bizarrely kind of racist, kind of complete no knowledge of what African art would be or could be,
or Iberian art for that matter.
So the things you hear at first that feel very casual, we've been discussing those few little hints to discover that there's some complexity there. So we wanted something that I think kind of furthered that, like confused us a little bit. Like, is this okay? Like, can this be art? Like, do we, and also kind of funny at the same time, maybe. I think that there's a slight comic element that I think we get to experience, which is like, really? And I think that was, in a weird way, that was where I think the organic side of it came in, which is that every time we looked at artwork that was either highly engineered or, very minimal, blocks
like the
or
Sarah
walls,
stuff,
it really pushed kind of one button. But every time we looked at things that were kind of oddly figurative or organic or had the sense that somebody actually made it with their hands, it started to kind of reveal the fact that this thing could have this kind of potential, and yet, what is it? So I don't know. I think that. But really, what you heard is what we had to respond to.
Yeah.
I don't think David really ever. Gave us any more than that.
No, he had. Yeah, and as soon as we showed him what we were thinking about, he was like, "Yes, that's."
Yeah, I think
what I had in mind. So.
I mean, scale was a huge aspect of it, and I think we knew that it had to feel like in some ways it had an impact on their home and their relationship and that it had taken over. Yeah. And yet it couldn't be so sci-fi that it was. It's tricky.
It also has to come up and down the stairs pretty often, so.
It comes apart.
So it comes apart, without ruining.
Yes, ma'am.
In the light of her discussion about her friend, Deirdre, and her wonderful, loving relationship with her mother, I noticed the photographs, and I wondered in view of the fact that you told us that this room was almost empty when you took it over and you put the things in, there were 2 photographs. I can't see who's in the second there, but I do see a woman just with glasses on, and I wondered if you brought that in.
We brought in everything, and these are photos actually of Zoe that we doctored.
Yeah, and could that possibly be
Her
Deirdre?
This was supposed to be her parents right here. This was the idea of this
From
one.
where I'm sitting, I can only see one.
So this is her.
Oh, okay.
This is her parents, Alice's parents.
They do look full of love, don't they?
They do. Yes.
So have a look around afterwards.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions, ma'am?
Can you talk about how different the experience was when you produced the play in the studio versus here? I mean, did it change? Was the audience's reaction different?
I haven't produced it in the studio, but Raphael saw it at the RSC was involved as a dramaturg when it was produced there. So maybe you can talk a little bit about.
It was literally just a wingback chair and a table, and there was no sculpture. It was all left to the audience's imagination, which was its own sort of frightening. And it was a very sort of shrill take on the character. So the actress was almost sort of in the Medea territory, really super intense, which is the sort of diametric opposite, I think, of what Miss Caldwell brings to the performance. They really hit a lot of the sort of anti-Americanness of the piece. So it was very interesting, and also it was 2005, and now we're so many years away from that. Ma'am.
Did you present it then with the same mystique that you present it now?
No, it was just, when I was working at the RSC at the Royal Shakespeare Company, it was just part of their season. It was in a double bill with another American play.
And what inspired you to ask Mrs. Caldwell?
That's
it's
Sarah.
Absolutely an act of genius.
Well, I feel like there's very, very few women who could do this play, and I had seen her as a teenager do masterclass, and just had always thought she was amazing, and so I basically was just kept asking her to do it. She said no 3 times.
We all were waiting with bated breath at the office every time we knew Sarah would ask.
So yeah, but she's really happy. I think it's worked out very well. She's enjoyed
and
it.
the concept, this is a secret society and so on, and the mystique of the presentation. So is that something new that you brought to?
I mean, part of it was just practical, that we didn't want a ton of people showing up here every night, so that's what the main reason we couldn't give away the address ahead of time was it had already sold out, so we didn't want to release where it was happening because we didn't want like a ton of people showing up. So that was really it, and we wanted for the experience to be as much as possible in Alice's voice, so that's why we sent the email, that people get an email in Alice's voice saying where to go. Rather than it coming from like an institution.
The handwriting.
And the handwriting on the cards and the letterpress. We just tried to, we decided in terms of a marketing campaign for this show, it's not like the show where you're doing e-blasts and ads and, we decided we wanted to do none of that because it just didn't really make sense. So, the whole marketing campaign was very, very different and very specific to the show. So, thank you.
In fact, I think in Newsweek's review they said, welcome to this show you'll never see. So you 30 are very lucky. Are there any other questions?
What year did David write it?
2001. He wrote it, full 2001.
Has he come to this production?
Oh, yeah, he's been very involved. He's been a lot of rehearsals and has been very, very involved. So, yes.
Yes,
Has
sir.
the text changed much in this incarnation from?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, we've been able to respond to Zoe and the room, and a little bit. But it's the core of it, absolutely not. But yeah, there's definitely been little things that we've tweaked as we've gone. So, yeah.
Well, if there's no other questions, I want to thank you very, very much for coming, and thank you, Sarah and Louisa. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.